And welcome to the Actual Tech Media Expert Series special event on protecting Amazon Web Services, real-world best practices. My name is Keith Ward. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator today. Now, before we get started, there are a few things we want to bring to your attention. First, we encourage any questions in the questions box of your event control panel. We'll have team members responding to questions during the live event and also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Now, the Q&A panel is also the place to let us know if you have any technical issues. A browser refresh will fix most issues, but if that doesn't work, let us know in the Q&A and we'll help you out. Now, you'll also see a handout section in your panel. In there, you'll find links to resources for all of today's sponsors. The handout section also has some valuable Actual Tech Media assets, including a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to Actual Tech Media's printed resources on technology topics. At the end of today's event, we'll also be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one registrant. Now, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize, and you can find the prize terms and conditions link in the handout section as well. So now we want to bring your attention to a cool opportunity for the decision makers out there to get connected with new and emerging tech and innovative vendors. So here's how it works. All you need to do is click on the link in your handouts tab and fill out the application. The Actual Tech Media crew will then match you with some vendors we think you should be chatting with based on your needs. There will also be fun opportunities you can choose to join in, like surveys, test running new solutions, extended demos, and so on. You'll get some chances to win extra prizes as well, chats with great people, and learn about the hottest new trends in tech. So be sure to apply or send the link to a decision maker in your crew. Okay, so these Expert Series events are special product neutral looks at pressing technology problems presented by an expert in the field. But the support of our sponsors make it possible for us to bring you this content. So we want to give a special shout out to each of them. Okay, we're supported in today's event by Portworx. Portworx helps protect your mission critical AWS apps and does it as easily as pushing a button. Today's event is also sponsored by Rubrik, the pioneers of zero trust security. Rubrik helps you achieve business resilience against cyber attacks, malicious insiders, and operational disruptions. This event is also brought to you by Palo Alto Networks. Palo Alto Networks continually delivers innovation to enable secure digital transformation, even as the pace of change is accelerating, and it is accelerating. And we're also sponsored today by Laceworks. Okay, sorry about that. We're sponsored also by Lacework, which focuses on risks that matter most, understanding your cloud, and finding unknown threats. Fast and flexible operationalization, that's a big word at scale, and offering a single platform for continuous security and integrated experience across clouds. All right, so time for our presentation and for our presenter. Let's get this show on the road. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to Melissa Palmer. Now, Melissa is an independent technology analyst and ransomware resiliency architect, and a terrific technology writer as well. And that's something I know about since I've edited a lot of her articles. It's rare to find someone who knows the tech and can write so well. So I always appreciate Melissa's contributions to our content and also to this particular expert series. So Melissa, the ball is in your court. Take it away.
Happy to be joining everybody here today. And yeah, we're going to talk about some real world best practices for protecting your AWS workloads. So I want to keep this really conversational. So I'm going to keep an eye on the questions and just kind of throw them in there, and I'll get to them as we are talking. So let's get started. The first thing I really want to do is set the stage and give us all a really good baseline of some of the threats we might be facing out there in the cloud with security, specifically AWS. We're going to take a look at some of the most common security issues in AWS I see over and over. And then we're going to talk about, what do I do? How do I fix some of this stuff? But I want to start with a fun little story. So I have a question for you, everybody out there. I want you to tell me in the chat, what is your biggest cloud security mistake? And while I wait for some of those answers to come in, I'm going to tell you about mine. You know, sometimes you get those like special projects at work and they're like, it has to be done yesterday and you have to do all this stuff and rush. I did that in the cloud, public cloud, had to set up a bunch of servers and stuff like that. And I was just wanting to get this thing to work. So I just kind of opened up RDP everywhere on the internet, right? To publicly on the internet. So I did my little project. I was good to go. I left the environment running because I figured maybe I'll come back to it and do a little testing. But when I came back, as it turns out, someone else had gotten to it first, right? So I had to call RDP, Ransomware Deployment Protocol. They had ransomware in my whole server. My server was actually my backup server too. So they had my backups, they had everything. The whole thing was blown up, but I did have a copy of my backups going externally to the public cloud. So I was able to recover everything super simply. But that was just something I did because, hey, I need to get this project done. And that's all I'm thinking about. So that was probably my biggest cloud security mistake. Somebody said, Adam said he forgot to turn off an unused server. Yeah, that's always a nasty bill. Scott says not understanding and being aware of risks of public exposure. Yeah, that is another huge one. So let's face it, we all make mistakes in the cloud, and it's a matter of learning from those mistakes, right? And kind of figuring out what we need to do it better. Another Scott says not having a good software security program. I see that a lot. But it's important to remember, right? The cloud is not magic. And I think a lot of people think that, hey, if I go to the cloud, there's all these cloud native things, I'm good to go, but you still have to implement them, right? You still actually have to use the software that the cloud provider is providing you in a manner that keeps your environment protected. We don't get a pass from every good security practice ever just because we went to the cloud and it's magic. And I know it's so easy to take out your credit card and get started with AWS. I opened another AWS account the other day for a new business I was starting. I put in my credit card and I was off to go in like 5 minutes. It was so simple, right? But it's really easy to kind of do the wrong things because it's so easy. David said his biggest mistake was having an IAM account with a global admin. That's a problem too. And it's just some of those things that, you know, again, the cloud isn't magic, so we have to be careful. And I want to dive a little deeper on the shared responsibility model of AWS before we get started, because this is really important for everybody to know. One of the magic things about the cloud is it's so easy to take out that credit card and start deploying workloads, right? That's because AWS is responsible for security of the cloud. So we don't need to worry about necessarily things like, oh, is our site redundant, right? Because they have that all built in. We can just make sure we deploy in 2 different availability zones, right? We don't need to worry about hardware anymore, which is really nice. We don't have to worry about the power or the cooling or anything like that. We don't have to worry about hardware failures, right? AWS takes care of all of that under the covers, and, you know, we don't have to worry anymore. They also take care of things like compute, storage, database, and networking, right? And we're just consuming it as a service from them instead of having to get into the game of, let me go configure that switch port and make sure I have the right VLANs on it, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, there's the kind of the AWS magic software that runs on top of all those different things to help provide those services. And then there's a line and it all changes, right? We are still responsible for a lot of things when it comes to cloud security. Our data, let's start at the top. We're responsible for our data and our customer data, right? We need to protect that. We're responsible for platform applications, identity and access management. We're going to say who's going to access what and what rights they have. That's one of the big things in security right now, right? Operating system, network, firewall configuration. Now, remember, we're configuring software firewalls and software networks. We don't need to worry about the hardware, but all these concepts have been abstracted into software for the cloud, load balancing and things like that. And of course, we care about inside data encryption, server-side encryption, encryption on network traffic, encryption everywhere, because we're in the cloud, right? We're public. We're sending our things over the internet in most cases. So that encryption really becomes something that's super important to everybody as we kind of go on our cloud journeys together. So it's important to remember as we go forward that this is a shared responsibility model. It's not a no responsibility model, we do still have certain responsibilities when it comes to security in the cloud. And it's really easy to make the same mistakes we made on-prem when we go to the cloud. Because if we're used to doing something a different way, or we're used to doing something one way, we're probably going to continue to do things the same way in the cloud. So it's actually a really good opportunity to kind of take a step back and say, what are our problems that we have on-prem now, and how can we do them better in the cloud? Someone else Kevin had a really good answer here. In a different cloud, they had a database connection string with a username and plain text password. He ran his demo and the network admin asks, how are you getting to the database? Oops, lesson learned. Key vaults are your friend. Yes, they are. So there's so many things out there and there's so many things we have to be aware of. But I want to kind of focus on some of the 4 big areas that I see problems in. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a deeper dive into all of these areas. But these are some of the common AWS security issues. And you guys even hit on that as we were kind of chatting here, right? Identity and access management. That's just huge. Lack of encryption is a problem everywhere because we're in the public cloud. We're using shared resources and we're doing silly things like connecting to things from the internet. Misconfigurations. For a lot of people, the cloud can be a new thing, and on-prem misconfigurations can be a security risk too. And then here's the thing that grinds my gears. No backups, right? People don't bother taking backups in the cloud because the cloud is magic. You still need to have backups. We still need to make sure that we're protecting our data at the end of the year. And then we have a little poll coming up right here. So Keith, this is something that I thought was really interesting to kind of get some feedback from our audience. I want to know from all of you, like, where do you struggle with some of these security issues? Because like I said, we're going to take a deeper dive, right? And I want to kind of talk about where things are going for everybody.
Of these 4, Melissa, if you were going to prioritize, like, what is the biggest one, do you think? What is the most important? Well, we're seeing misconfigurations right now with a slightly...
That's winning. Identity and access management, that's huge.
What would you say are the biggest ones that you see and ones that people are ignoring maybe?
And this is going to be, I'm a little partial here because I worked for Veeam Software for a number of years before I went independent out on my own. And the amount of times I talked to people that did not actually have any backups of anything in their environment, much less the cloud, was simply astounding. So I'm going to have to say no backups because at the end of the day, and I don't want to spoil my next slide, but I might have to. At the end of the day, if something happens in your environment, and we'll talk about what can happen, you might only have backups to rely on. So I'm going to say no backups. And I see people kind of coming up with that too. That's important.
Let me ask you, is that related to an issue of discoverability and observability too? If you don't even know where your backups are half the time, you don't know how to secure them, right? Do you feel like there's still
and you know what's even worse?
Of knowing what's on your network out there?
Absolutely. And what's even worse, and it ties very closely to that observability piece, is it's so easy to deploy stuff and forget about it in the cloud. That's what people do, right? They just kind of forget and they aren't protecting it because they forgot it was there in the first place. Anybody who is saying other in the poll, feel free to drop your other in the chat so we can talk about that too. Ned says that disaster recovery becomes problematic without secure backups. Yes, sir. That is very, very true and something I know all too well.
We could call that the understatement of the year, couldn't we? I think.
All right. So it seems like
really interesting. I'm going to throw this back to you. I'm going to back on out because I love what you're doing here. And
okay.
I'm going to put it, I'm going to hop out now and I'll rejoin you again after a little bit. Thanks,
all right.
Melissa.
Thank you, Keith. So, all right. So in the lead, we have identity and access management. Not surprising. Misconfigurations, no backups has climbed to position number 3, and lack of encryption. So we're going to dive a little deeper into these. And why are we going to talk about all this? I'm going to tell you why we're going to talk about this. Because what I have to do now, unfortunately, is say one of the most overused words in any IT professional's life right now, which is the R word, ransomware. Unfortunately, it's not if we get attacked by ransomware, it's usually when, and the cloud is still very much a target. right? So the cloud is still a target, but most people I've seen sometimes get hit on-prem first before the cloud, because some people do take a little bit more of an opportunity to secure things in the cloud. We have a question in the chat of like, hey, I'm going to starting ready for a new cloud deployment and migration. What's the best thing you can do? The best thing you can do is upfront planning. Take the time to really plan your deployment, decide what your applications are going to look like in the cloud. What is your network going to look like a cloud? What needs to talk to who, right? And then kind of figure out from there, how do I do it in a secure manner? Because that's the best thing you can do for yourself today, is kind of make sure you're fixing those issues you had on-prem when you go to the cloud. And security is the big one because of ransomware. You still can get attacked by ransomware in the cloud, especially if you don't have your networking configured correctly, or you're just, have servers that are publicly available on the internet. You're not using firewalls. You're not using any of the great technology out there. You don't have software looking at your environment and looking for signs of ransomware. So everything we're going to talk about ties back to, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're not the victim of a cyber attack. And the most common one right now happens to be ransomware. It's easy to either encrypt servers or just go steal data, right? Like maybe I won't even bother encrypting. I'm just going to go and go through all the CEO's files and see if I can grab something, or go through the finance department files or something like that and grab something and just extort the victim. Hey, I have your data, and if you don't want that to be public, you have to pay me. So while most cyber attacks do have a ransom component, at the end of the day, someone could just decide to go break stuff, right? Wreak havoc for fun. So now we're going to dive a little bit more into each of these areas and talk about them a little bit more. All right, so identity and access management, I am in trouble. The keys to the kingdom, right? Someone can easily get the keys to the kingdom. If you have a user that has a common password they use across everything, and they're using it to access the application here, you've got a problem, because how many leaks of password leak databases are there out there, right? It's very easy to get kind of stuff. This is where it comes into some really good basic security hygiene, right? And understanding the different types of access that people need to do their jobs. Principle of least privilege is always my number one security topic that I talk about. The people who have access to your environment should only be able to perform their job functions, and that's it. If I am in the finance team and I am responsible for running finance reports at the end of the month, I shouldn't probably even be able to log into AWS. I probably don't need that to do my job, right? Because it's probably a web-based application and that's where I'm connecting. I shouldn't be able to go and change that application. I shouldn't be able to do anything. So it's important to make sure that you're not letting everybody under the sun log into AWS, and kind of like making sure that people who are logging in can only do their job function. If I'm the network team, should I be able to deploy a compute instance? In some cases, maybe. In some cases, maybe I have a different team do it. It really kind of comes down to the principle least privilege again, which is one of the best security things out there that you can implement for yourself. I have a great question from Lynn. We're using AWS, and AWS offers a wide range of services, each with its own set of security features and configuration options. You are right on there. Managing security across multiple AWS services can be complex and time-consuming. Is there a single product to provide security management for all different services about AWS? We're going to address your question in a little bit with something that AWS has to help you. But at the end of the day, it is unfortunate that there is not one single thing that will help you in every aspect of security, right? It's going to usually be a combination of solutions and kind of how do you kind of piece them all together in a way that works for you. But we're going to talk about securing AWS services specifically in a little bit. So we'll hit that one. So what is another hot topic? Lack of encryption. Encrypt your data before someone else does, right? Because what happens when someone gets access to your environment? If they find encrypted data, they could steal it, but then they would have to decrypt it. And usually that's just way too much trouble for someone. They're looking for stuff that's unencrypted and easy to take, right? So the big question in AWS usually is the service that you're using when kind of, does it support encryption, right? Because each kind of service has its own unique properties and things like that. And do we want to encrypt our data at rest and in flight? Of course we do, whenever possible, because like I said, it could be a very big deterrent to people out there when they get in the environment and kind of want to wreak havoc. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what happens when they get in there in a little bit. Misconfiguration. Hey, it happens, right? And it can lead to security issues. One thing that we used to do really commonly on-prem, and like my background is very traditional infrastructure, full stack infrastructure, especially with VMware. I'm a VMware certified design expert. And a lot of times when we would do a brand new big deployment, we would do burn-in time, right? We would just let the environment burn in. We would deploy applications that we would delete later, right? Like, hey, app teams, just come in here and deploy a copy of your environment and let's see how everything goes. We would monitor everything closely to make sure, again, that we didn't misconfigure everything was setting up right, or kind of what we can do. And that helps a lot in a cloud environment too, doing the same type of thing. Maybe I shouldn't turn on production like the day I deploy everything. Maybe we should get the teams in here and we should kick the tires and we should kind of do some things before we actually start running things. And then the one thing that I think that everybody should be doing on-prem, in the cloud, whatever, is penetration testing, right? Hire a firm who specializes in penetration testing and have them come in and test your environment, right? These are the white hat hackers that are going to come find find the vulnerabilities, find the unpatched software, find what you misconfigured, and they're going to tell you before one of the bad guys does. This is something that I think is really helpful in kind of protecting your environments against ransomware and just in general for good security hygiene. Because remember, it's not always ransomware. Ransomware is just a fancy name for they want to extort money out of you. But any kind of cyber incident, really, the attackers are getting in some way. Now, something that I just want to add has been really interesting over the last couple of years. We always saw that the number one way hackers would get in would be a phishing attack, right? Somebody clicks the link in the email, and then what happens? The whole environment comes crippling to its knees. We actually saw a shift in the last year or so where that's no longer the number one attack vector. Number one is vulnerabilities, right? So software level vulnerabilities. It was something there that I had that wasn't patched, and the vulnerability was exploited to allow someone to get into the environment and kind of do bad things, right? So penetration testing and production issues can help you find them. Again, those burn-in periods really help kind of find things before they go bad. We have a couple questions coming in about more general ransomware and best practices for protecting it. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. I just want to let you guys know. Now, no backups, right? I don't have any backups. My favorite saying is that if you like it, you should have backed it up. And remember, we're talking about the AWS shared responsibility model, and we're still responsible for our data. If everything else fails and someone does get into your environment, the last line of defense you have is to recover from backup if everything is encrypted, right? You don't ever want to be in the position to pay the ransom, because even if you pay that ransom, there's also some staggering statistics out there that basically say, even if they provide the decryption keys, you can't recover everything, right? These are criminals, right? So we're going to give criminals money and expect that we're going to be up and running back in no time at all. Not everybody recovers everything, even after they get the decryption keys. And then my personal thing is always the integrity of that data. It's been encrypted, decrypted. You don't know what else they might have done to it. So it's trash in my mind anyway. So you never want to be in a position where you have to pay the ransom because your servers are encrypted. Paying the ransom, unfortunately, is usually a business decision made by someone much higher up than us. If they do have sensitive data, chances are you might still have to pay the ransom, right? That happens all the time and you don't hear it a lot of time. What we want to do is make sure that the reason that you're not paying the ransom is because you can't actually recover the data, right? Take that off the table. And then hopefully with a little bit of help and monitoring, we've caught them early in the attack process and we've figured out that they're in there. And while they might have encrypted some stuff, maybe they didn't get enough data that makes us say, hey, maybe we should pay the ransom. And this kind of is something that I've been talking about and brings us to the next new thing that is really kind of popping everywhere in security. And that is a part of zero trust architecture that is simply assume breach, right? Assume that you will be breached at some point. And that ties back to your backups and all that good stuff. assume that they're in, right? Assume that they got in, and how do we mitigate the damage once they're in? How do we make sure we find them fast? How do we make sure that we limit the ability to move laterally in the environment, right? How do we make sure that if they do get in, because they will get in, do we minimize the damage? And again, the last stage of that is absolutely backups and having backups and being able to recover, because we can't fix everything. We can never mitigate every risk. It's just not possible. Ransomware groups are, they're interesting. There's all these ransomware as a service groups where basically all the threat actor does have to get into your environment somehow. Then they contact a ransomware group who gives them the ransomware and instructions on how to deploy it and get into your environment further. And that's it. You're done, right? So it's a lot of people that are specialists in ways to get into environments. That's all they do, right? Like if maybe they have a special, like maybe there's a bad guy out there that all he does is exploit RDP and he's really good at it. And then he goes back to one of these ransomware as a service gangs. He gets his cut of the ransom and he doesn't really have to do anything else but get in. So we all need to be assuming that we are going to be breached at some point. And now we can get into some really, really interesting stuff too, right? So how do we fix this? And we've touched a lot of this. We're going to talk about in a moment the AWS Well Architected security pillar. Now, one of the things I have always loved about AWS is the really, really thorough documentation they provide. I mean, there's a lot of it out there because there's so many services, but they've always had the notion of the well architected framework, where basically AWS guides you through how to architect your applications in a way that will work well with AWS from a security perspective, from a cost savings perspective, from a performance perspective, all of that. That's in their well architected framework, and there is a big security pillar in there. We also briefly talked about how we want to do regular penetration testing, because that is something that's really important to help us find those issues. And we had a question about someone who was trying to think about their next cloud migration, right? We want to design environments and applications with security in mind. This is a great opportunity as we go to AWS to fix things that we might not be doing on-prem well, to really curtail the access to different services and even AWS itself to people who absolutely only need them. You need that type of access for business processes. And the only issue is there's no single way to fix it, right? If I told you right here that here's the 5 things you need to do to secure your AWS environment, quite frankly, I'd be lying. There is so much to consider, and there is no single bullet solution out there that's going to help you, right? It's going to be a combination of design, best practices when it comes to access and identity management, all that kind of stuff rolls together to provide your overall, hopefully, very secure solution. And then here's the best tip I have, because we just talked about assuming something's going to go wrong. Assume breach. Document everything, right? Document everything you do as you work in AWS and as you migrate to AWS, because it's not always all of us who are doing the work making the decisions, right? Sometimes somebody might say, well, you know what, that's going to cost so much, so I want you to go with this deployment mechanism or this model. And what happens with that is sometimes those decisions come back to bite us. They were a valid business decision at the time, but during a ransomware attack, they're going to start going through everything and being like, well, who decided this? Who decided this? Who decided that? And we just want to have documentation that said, yes, we proposed this solution for AWS, but you know what? Someone told us it was going to be too expensive, so we did it a different way. Maybe it was we had to lower the retention period on our backups because the storage was too much money. We want to have that documented for when disaster day actually happens, so we can kind of go in there and be like, hey, we kind of told you so. I hate to say it, but we did. So now I want to talk about a little bit more about some of the AWS well architected stuff, because this is really, really interesting. And it ties back to how you would architect a data center on-prem. If you look at the pillars of the well architected framework, these are all things that we do every day in our infrastructure, right? Operational excellence. We want to make sure that our AWS environment is easy to operate. Security is paramount right now. Reliability is. Performance efficiency. We want to get the performance we need at a price that makes sense to us. Cost optimization ties very closely with performance efficiency. And then sustainability, right? That's always something that's really important for AWS. And the great thing is you guys can all go into AWS and run the well architected tool against your current deployment. So I had a bunch of questions in the chat about like, well, what do I do? How do I get started? I have all of these AWS components. How do I make sure I'm doing a good job or find out that I'm not? You're going to use the well architected framework, right? And you're going to use the well architected tool to run your environment through it and see what AWS comes back with, because that is the single best place to start right now. Because who knows AWS better than AWS? I mean, I've made a career out of design and architecture, especially for ransomware resiliency. But I tell everybody to start with the AWS tool because, again, nobody knows AWS and nobody can protect AWS like AWS can. Now, if I'm talking to anybody out there who is like especially passionate about the security features in AWS, they do actually have an AWS certified security specialty. And I need some study buddies too. So maybe this is something, drop in the chat if you're interested. You can find me on Twitter at vmis33. This is something that when I was actually writing this presentation, I'm like, I should go get that certification. There is also a security certification for AWS that specifically focuses on a lot of these issues. So let's see what else we have. Yeah, everybody should go run the well architected tool and read the framework. I actually read some of these frameworks for fun as I was preparing for this because they're really interesting. The last time I had looked at well architected was a while ago, and I wasn't looking at it from a security lens. I was pretty much looking at it from a compute and storage and network lens. So the fact that they've rolled security into this tool really does say a lot that AWS does want us to be secure, but they're only going to take care of security up to a certain point for us, right? That's how we kind of get in the position where we're in trouble or we're doing a really good job, is understanding that shared responsibility model. That is super important pretty much from the get-go. So some key takeaways today. The cloud is very much a shared responsibility model. We need to remember that we are responsible for securing our data. That's it, full stop. If someone else is able to access our data, we're in trouble, right? Because they could take it, they could encrypt it, they could do anything. So here's a great example. S3 buckets are a really good way to provide access to stuff, right? If you have to share files with someone, or you're an organization and you're just like kind of, sharing files with people from your website, like click here to download this white paper. A lot of people put them on S3 buckets, publicly accessible to the internet. That's a thing people do, right? But you don't want every S3 bucket publicly accessible to the internet. Like, do you want your backups publicly accessible to the internet? Of course you do. And I think someone had asked in the chat as well, is like specifically for ransomware, what are some of the best things you can do in AWS? And let me just say that S3 storage is absolutely magical. And there's something called object locked in the S3 API. And this is something that a lot of other storage vendors have actually adopted, whether they be cloud or on-prem storage providers. S3 is basically is a protocol as well, right? So that is like the gold standard for object storage. And through object lock, we can do something called immutability. And what does immutability mean? It means that our files cannot be deleted or modified by anybody. That means they can't be encrypted by a bad guy. And that means they can't be deleted by a bad guy either. So when we store our backup data in an immutable fashion in S3, no one can touch it. No one can do anything to it. Nobody can break it. So we're always going to have a good copy of our backups, which is going to be super important as we start to talk about assume breach, right? We have to assume that this is going to happen to us at some point in time. You're going to have a security event if you haven't had one yet. It's just like an unfortunate thing we all need to realize. So the best thing we could do, of course, is to prepare now so we can recover later. So we need to be assuming that they're going to get in. Now, how do they get in? That's when penetration testing can come in. And that's even when running that well-architected framework can come in. Let's start now to try to figure out what is wrong in our environment and start to fix some of the quick wins and things that are really bad, right? And the problem is there is no way to fix everything at all at the same time. And we want to make sure that we're documenting everything, and we want to go for really high impact fixes. So making sure anything IAM related is the first place to start, really, because there's just so many ways to get someone's credentials these days that is a good place to make sure that we're protecting each other. And that ties with the principle of least privilege. Making sure stuff isn't publicly accessible on the internet when it shouldn't be is probably like a number 2 thing to do. And then number 3, I would say, would be to have your backups and make sure they're stored in an immutable fashion, because like I said, there's no single way to fix everything. And we do need to assume that something bad is going to happen at some point. So where do we start? Again, we start with some of the common issues that many of us face: identity and access management, lack of encryption, misconfigurations, no backups. And we start with anything that we might have noticed along the way. Like if we know, for example, I guess this would tie back to identity and access management afterwards. But if you've had a security incident on-prem, my big takeaway from that would be, I would hope that you learned from it and you're not going to go back and do it in the cloud as well. So kind of like maybe even talking to the security teams, right? Because they should absolutely be part of your cloud migration and saying, hey, what have you learned internally from our on-prem environment that we do well and we don't do well, and bring those principles to the cloud. Chances are there's internal security auditors that might be doing internal penetration testing and stuff like that on-prem if you haven't made the cloud journey yet. But I really like the notion of external penetration testing, like hiring a firm to do it for you, because sometimes we're a little too impartial to do a good job of it on our own. And that ties back to some of these common issues: lack of encryption. If you don't encrypt your data, someone's going to do it for you, especially in the cloud, especially if it's publicly available on the internet, and not having those backups. So now I just want to check, because we've been chatting for a while here, does anybody else have any questions? And I think I hit a lot of them in the chat, but I'm going to go through things again as we kind of chat here a little bit and see what else we can talk about. We have a lot of really good and really complex questions. So secondary backup and disaster recovery within AWS. All right, pop quiz. What AWS region is always the one that has some kind of issue? And I'll tell you why in a minute. And it's actually the region that I live in, although I never deploy in here. US East 1 is the original AWS region. When AWS started, it started with US East 1, which means like every AWS service ties back to US East 1 at some point or another. And as we found out with a number of AWS outages, AWS doesn't even architect things the best sometimes, right? There were a lot of single points of failure and things like that. And yeah, it was just really messy. So the big thing would be to make sure that you are kind of protected in the way that you would be if you were using an on-prem data center. So you want to make sure that you're in different regions, different availability zones in AWS. In the event that something does happen, you would be able to recover or just keep running in a different region or AZ. I see a lot of people actually radically re-architecting things when they go to AWS and just like spreading things out all over the world. So it's like, I don't even care if a region goes down. I have this thing load balanced and something else will happen. Something else will pick up for it across if there is some kind of outage or something like that. And an outage isn't necessarily an AWS outage, right? Remember, we're responsible for a certain layer. So it could be stuff like an application change goes bad, or somebody made a network change to a VPC or something like that. It could very much be a human error or an application error that does still bring us problems. But again, if we've designed our applications in a distributed manner, that can protect a lot of it. And that's not something we could easily do in our data centers before, because a lot of us only had 1 or 2 data centers. And if anything happened to one of those 1 or 2 data centers, we were in a lot of trouble, right? So the cloud does bring a lot of really interesting things that we can do as we kind of progress throughout our cloud journey. Let's see what else we have in here. Okay, so I have a lot of questions about just generally like cyber threats in general, and how to monitor and manage them. I would honestly start with, what are you using to manage and monitor that stuff on-prem right now? And will it work in AWS? That's your first point of discussion. Because from an operational perspective, if you can manage a single platform that does look at security event management, it makes sense to do that first. If you don't, then there's a number of cloud more based products you can look at. But then it's kind of like, do you still need hybrid cloud capabilities too? So I'm actually a big fan of using a product suite across my on-prem and multiple cloud infrastructures if I'm having a multi-cloud deployment, than having a single thing for each cloud, right? Just from an operational aspect, that gets really out of hand really fast and can be hard to manage. So that would be my advice as a starting point. Let's see what else we have. Somebody said that it's better to have more than one backup. Yes. You actually always want more than one copy of your backup data, at least 3 of them. And more is always better because, again, you want to have these in different areas. You would probably want to have a copy of backup data, quite honestly, not in AWS as well. I would be sending it to a different cloud as well. I would be maybe sending some of my data back on-prem. That's a popular thing to do for some people. And, storage in general has gotten very, very cost effective these days. So it's easy to do some of that stuff. Is there a risk of keeping backups in Glacier backup in the same AWS account due to risk of global admin being compromised? There's a risk with everything, and it comes with trade-offs. A lot of customers I use will have multiple backup accounts, right, to try to mitigate against some of that when they can. Just because exactly what you said, right? Global admin being compromised. They will literally have separate AWS accounts for some of these things. And there is, again, no single solution that really will kind of help things or fix things. Oh, Ned, you asked my favorite question. How much time do we have left, Keith? Because this is a long one. How do cyber insurance come into play with pertaining to multi-cloud platform deployments? So here's my little rant about cyber insurance these days. And it's not a rant. It's the fact that these cyber insurance companies have been in trouble because they've had to pay out so much, right? So a lot of times when you go for a cyber policy, they're going to give you a list of things that you have to do to be able to get your policy. And by the time you actually do all of those things, you probably don't need the cyber insurance as much, right? Because they're making you do the things like have your backup, store them offsite, store them in a manner that is immutable. They're making sure that you actually are following the principle of least privilege, right? They're going to take a look at your IAM stuff because they don't want to have to actually pay out because they've had to pay out some more. And the one thing that a lot of cyber companies do include in their insurance policies is a retainer for an incident response firm, which I am a massive fan of. If you don't have it as part of your cyber policy, you're not doing cyber insurance, I highly, highly recommend a retainer with a cyber incident response firm, because at the end of the day, if something does happen, you want the experts to come in and guide your teams on what they need to do next, right? Let the people who are pros who do this day in, day out help you versus even if you have internal incident response, right? This is not something that you do every day. So multi-cloud platform deployments, again, the cyber insurers are going to take a look at your whole environment and basically tell you what you need to do in each environment to make sure that you are up to snuff for them to write your policy. So they're going to go into specifics for every cloud environment and say, you should be doing this in AWS, this in Azure, and this in GCP. So there's a lot of interesting things around cyber insurance these days. Karthik asked, do I recommend penetration testing even for AWS private cloud solutions for safety? Yeah, I recommend it for everything, because a private cloud is only a private cloud until somebody gets in because somebody did something dumb and clicked a link, or I shouldn't say clicking a link is dumb. It happens to everybody, right? Or had used the same password over or something like that. So even though it's private cloud and it's not public, there's still people that log into that can be compromised. So I kind of recommend it everywhere. And I think we have answered a lot of our questions that we've had come in the chat. I don't know if anybody has anything last minute, but Keith, I just want to make sure that we're doing okay on time here.
Yeah, we're doing real well. I love it that you're getting to so many questions, Melissa. Such great feedback. It's just showing that people really are interested in this topic. It's something that It
is an important topic. And anybody who's watching this webinar today, you're in a better position than someone who's not here, because I'm really glad that you have these things top of mind. So now you can go back and look, dig into the well architected framework. That's probably one of my big takeaways from today, and take those steps and make sure that you are protected against these threats. And if you're not, that's okay, because now you have the knowledge you need to start putting together a plan on how to start protecting yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if I can ask you a question
Of
that I had
course.
thought of, and you being the expert, I want to pick your brain on this. We're seeing so much more now in terms of AI and how that is starting to affect attacks. I know, here we go, can of
Okay,
worms, right?
you're going to make me admit something that I did with AI, Keith. Okay.
Well, that's great. See, I notice this because now in my own inbox, I am seeing so many, the phishing attacks that are coming in are so much better now, right? They're so much more professional looking, making it much more likely that we're going to be compromised by that. What is that one of the main impacts of AI in terms of securing our
So
environment?
that makes it easier for people to write the phishing emails. Because, like, how do I say this nicely? There's some other there's a lot of people that don't speak English as a first language that are ransomware operators. Like, I don't know how else to say it. It's an international affair. So a lot of times you would get a phishing email. You're like, that's not even proper English. There's no way that's from my bank. Well, ChatGPT gets rid of that because they can just go say, write me an email, right? And they get something that's written really well and probably doesn't look like a human didn't write it, right? So that's a threat. And the bigger threat is something that I talked about a little bit, is that the barrier to entry is so low with ransomware as a service gangs. You can ask ChatGPT to write you ransomware. I might have done it, right? I asked it to write, and I did it in stages, right? Because if you ask ChatGPT to do anything like really bad, it won't do it. But if you ask it to do little things here and there and then piece it all together, guess what? You've just basically figured out how to do everything you could possibly need to do. So you can write code with ChatGPT, and why it's not as simple as saying, write me some ransomware. If you understand the basics of how it works, you can tell it what you want it to do and then piece it together at the end. And it doesn't take much to get it to actually run.
Absolutely. Now, I'm old enough to remember when script kiddies became a thing. Now, you probably remember this,
Yes,
right?
I do. I know script kiddies.
It became much easier
AI
to
script
start
kiddies
doing
are even
cyber
worse.
attacks. So
Yes.
this is exactly where I was going. You're right. It reminds me of the explosion of cyber attacks in the days of script kiddies, because they didn't have to have any real programming knowledge like you used to way back when. Same thing with ransomware, for example. Now that you've got ransomware as a service, let the other guys find the vulnerability. All you have to do is dive in and get what you can get, right? So are we going to see an explosion, do you feel like, with the AI now?
We've already seen such an explosion. Part of me is like, can it get any worse? Of course it can.
Right.
So it's definitely not going to hinder things. I think it's going to make some of it more accessible and just easier to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, we also can use AI to help. And we're seeing much more of that, of the protective factors of AI too, aren't we?
Yeah, and David even said in the comments, one side of AI is that both sides use it, right? It's important to leverage a good email security system that uses AI to fight phishing attacks. And there's a lot of sophisticated systems out there that are looking for signs of ransomware in your environment. They learn over time the steady state of your environment and what the burst characteristics are, right? So when they see something that's an anomaly, they can immediately alert you that something is happening that doesn't usually happen. And that can be an indicator of compromise, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me ask, given my background in journalism for a long time and IT journalism, let me give you a journalist question, right? These are the kind of things we always like to ask when we're talking to experts like you. But this is important, I think, especially given the topic today. What would you say if you had to point out the biggest misconception out there when it comes to securing data on AWS? I mean, you had talked about the shared responsibility model. Would you say it's that, that they still think, well, it's on Amazon, they're securing it, so all my, or are there other things out there that you think are dangerous that people need to be disabused of?
That's the number one, is just thinking that the cloud is magic and it's AWS and I don't need to worry. Because a lot of people just don't understand the shared responsibility model, because all they know is I took my credit card out and I had my application running and I'm good to go. That's probably the first one. And then the second one is like, don't bring your bad security habits to the cloud. Use it as an opportunity to take the time in figuring out what you have done well so you can continue it and what you haven't done well. I've talked to so many customers who are just like, well, the VP says we have to be all in the cloud in 3 months or we're all fired. And they just rush to do it, right? And when they're doing that, they do all sorts of silly things to meet these timelines. Like, the cloud is an opportunity to fix what's wrong, right? There's another old saying when it comes to computer stuff, right? Garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you have garbage on-prem and you put it in the cloud, you still have garbage. So really the cloud should be seen as an opportunity to fix what isn't going well, even on an application layer, not even on a security layer, right? Use it as your reboot opportunity to do everything better going forward.
That is such good advice, because there can be nothing but benefit to making you rethink how you do security.
Exactly.
From the beginning, there's all kinds of things you may have missed. Now that when you're talking about implementing all these different endpoints, all these different attack vectors that didn't used to be there, you really have to broaden how you consider security, which can mean essentially starting again from the beginning, can it?
Yeah, it should. And it should be. You should use it as an opportunity for a clean slate.
Right. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And I don't think you answered this, but I want to just make sure of this. And then we're going to have to wrap this up today, Melissa. This question was from Jenny, and it was, does AWS have special protections against ransomware? Which is interesting because, we've alluded to ransomware a lot. Are there any built-in things now that Amazon
immutability is built in, right? And I don't remember. I actually was looking at all three clouds yesterday. I can't remember what they call their overall security suite. There's a name for it, and it's just escaping me at the moment. And that has like ransomware and anomaly detection built into it. So there are a bunch of native solutions that Amazon has, and it's baked into their security solution. And I'm going to have to Google it after this because I literally can't remember. But yeah, so that is a good place to start. If you don't have a solution today, start with the native ones and see what it will and will not do for you. Because it all kind of ties back to everybody's unique requirements at the end of the day. For some people, the native AWS stuff works perfectly. Some people need a little more. And again, some people are really looking for that platform that they want to manage multi-cloud and on-prem from a security perspective with a single pane of glass. I hate that term, but it's what a lot of people still look for. And people try to get close, but it doesn't usually happen.
Yeah. You win the buzzword bingo.
Oh, thank you.
With single pane of glass. Exactly. We didn't say digital transformation anywhere in here. So,
darn. Next time. I'll get it next time.
All right. So I think we're going to have to leave it there today, Melissa.
Thank you so much.
Together. Just a wonderful presentation. I learned so much from it, and it seems
good.
like
I'm glad.
It was just a delight to have you on, and appreciate your insights in the Q&A and getting to so many questions. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Okay. And with that, we have one more bit of business that we have got to take care of before we leave you for today. And that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the Amazon gift card, now remember, you have to be in attendance for the whole event to get this. And the winner for today's gift card is Jeremy Newman from Ohio. Congratulations, Jeremy. We'll be in touch very soon to get you your Amazon gift card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank our sponsors, Portworx, Rubrik, Palo Alto Networks, and Lacework for making this event possible. And as always, thanks for attending and for your great questions. It was so much fun to be on with you today, and I can't wait to do it again. Now that concludes today's event. Have a great rest of your day.